And hi, everyone. We're back with our next speaker, Brian Douglas. Brian is a developer advocate at GitHub, where he works on increasing the use of GitHub's platform for specific features through technical content distributed on the internet. He's also the co-lead of GitHub's first ERG, Employee Resource Group, and that is specifically called the Black Tocats. He focuses on growing the Black population of employees, as well as growing open source adoption in the community. Today, Brian is with us to talk about how to get involved in open source. Brian, welcome.
Thank you. All right. Oh, there we go. All right. So thank you very much. False start a little bit, but I'm Brian Douglas. I go by BWO, which is going to be my name card down below. That's my Twitter handle. So please reach out there. I have a lot to actually cover, so there's not going to be a lot of time, no time for Q&A at the end, but I'm happy to connect on either GitHub or Twitter after the fact. So my focus today is going to be on open source contributions and the path for your next open source contribution. So it's probably like relevant for you if you've done the development that you are using open source, but very few of us are actually contributing back to the open source community. And I'm really honored to take this day to really remember, what this day means for me and for people who look like me as well in the US. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about Juneteenth growing up. Actually, my mom's from Cuba. So a lot of my background actually comes from the Caribbean. So we spent a lot of time actually learning that history as a family. But the Juneteenth, just the fact that it took 2 years for just all enslaved people in the U.S. to basically be quote unquote free. I know there's a lot of other systematic things that we're sort of trying to address even today. But I think what it really comes down to is that since the emancipation till 1865, which June 19th, there are a lot of people who just didn't have any access to just regular things that you would think we would expect. And I think open source has a lot of correlations in that. But before I go into all the details, and I'm not going to go in like tons of details about history, I just wanted to bring attention to that. I wanted to share my path to open source because I've been doing open source for about 7 years, as long as I've been doing development. And my path into open source is probably similar to most people. Like, you find something that you want to accomplish, and then you eventually figure out how to contribute to it or leverage that framework, library, or whatnot. And my first introduction to open source was actually, I totally forgot my email is on there, but feel free to email me if you have any questions. Probably should have blurred that out, but I'm happy to get emails and questions. My first introduction to open source is actually through Node.js. So I got my introduction to Ruby on Rails, but I never contributed. I just used a lot of stuff. But I had the project where we wanted to build a Slack group. Slack was like brand new, and wanted to build a Slack group that we could connect with other Black engineers within our networks, and this basically build a powerhouse of people we can connect with. It was also not just engineering, there were business people, there were designers as well. But my job was to basically be the tech lead. But at the time, I just started programming. I was a junior programmer, never touched Node.js, didn't even know what it was. I knew what JavaScript was, but didn't know what Node.js was. So I took that time to learn how to get something up and running, which was a Slack inviter. And the way I did this was because actually a lot of people actually didn't know how to do this, but a lot of people were throwing libraries out there to automatically add people into Slack, because you had to manually send invites through emails. It's the way it was set up. I know we've sort of solved that problem today. But yeah, roughly 5 years ago, I figured it out, but I couldn't actually get it to work. And so I just took the time to go to the code base, and I found on the actual, on GitHub, this person right here, Chad, which also apologies for Chad. I totally forgot that your email was there. But Chad actually, he went out and put his code out on the internet and had the problem solved for me. So I went to him and actually reached out and said, hey, I don't know how to use GitHub really. I was pretty noob at that point. And I emailed him instead of actually just opening up an issue or opening up a PR. And that was like my introduction to open source. And I think he was super friendly, where it got to the point where we went back and forth, and he never corrected me. He never said, hey, can you open an issue? Can you open a PR? Can you ask me somewhere else that's not my personal email? But he was just super helpful. And it got to the point where he actually let me know the entire time we were actually corresponding through the weekend. He mentioned he was a K-pop concert. And I thought that was kind of blew me away, that someone that took their time out of their weekend while they were actually like enjoying their life down in, I think at the time he was in Thailand, so they had a K-pop concert down there. He took the time and actually mentored me and showed me how to actually do Node.js. So I'm super appreciative of that. So fast forward to today, I work at GitHub. GitHub is a platform for developers to collaborate. This might be obvious, but I like to imagine that everybody's first issue, like this first experience at GitHub, could be right now. So highly recommend check out GitHub if you want to connect with developers or to connect with code. It is definitely for you. I'm a developer advocate at GitHub. A lot of people don't know what that means. I relate to developers. That is my full name as well. And I sort of sum it up that I'm the Beyonce of GitHub. So I'm a big fan of Beyonce. Beyonce advocate. GitHub has 50 million developers worldwide using the platform. And Beyonce has a lot of people listening to her music. She's got the Bayhive too as well. But I joke around with that. But I'm really, really passionate around teaching people how to contribute, how to get involved in GitHub, how to leverage the platform to their best advantage. And I mentioned this because I really think that I truly believe that everybody who's writing code should be involved in open source because open source is actually super valuable for not only for us to get solve our problems and deliver libraries and maybe instead of spending weeks on problems, we could actually find libraries that are already existing for us to be able to leverage. And Black Duck is actually this open source security platform, and they did a whole back in this is from 2016. They did research on the value of open source. So shortly after I got fully into it, open source is actually super valuable, where they actually require it. Like a lot of companies will look at your GitHub. A lot of companies will ask, what sort of contributions you're making to open source. If you have expertise in specific JavaScript libraries or even some Python or machine learning, a lot of that comes through open source exposure, to the point where these are going to be a lot more numbers too as well. But jobs are actually looking for people to work on open source full time, looking to contribute upstream. So there's a lot of us who are just engineers who are not actually contributing back and making the open source cycle a full cycle where we receive, but we also give back. And I feel like there's a lot of opportunity missed, and I'll get into that in a bit. But if I could summarize those last two slides that had way too much information on it, open source is valuable to your career. Whether you're using it or you're contributing back, it's going to be valuable, and it's actually going to be an investment that continues to give back to yourself. So this talk is actually broken into 3 steps. I break it out so that way we have a good context of what to expect coming up. So we'll talk about finding contributions, talk about the onboarding experience for open source, and then also sustainability of open source as well. Excellent. So starting with the find and track new open source contributions. So some of us, we're already experienced with this. We know where to look. We know what projects to work on. And some of us have not even had a chance to even contribute to anything or even knew what to contribute to. And also I mentioned, I didn't mention, I have the chat on. I just wanted to get the feedback. It's nice to have interaction. So I'm curious in the chat, let's drop in what projects you work on if you are involved in open source. I'd love to know. But there's a bit of a problem with this approach if we only do step number 1. There's 2 and 3 that we're going to talk about. So there's a quote that I love bringing up and I like to think about a lot, where MLK, Martin Luther King, so if you're based in the US, Martin Luther King was a civil rights activist. I think his legacy is probably expounded outside the US. I'm not sure. I don't spend a lot of time talking about this outside the US. But sorry, I just need to turn off my notifications so I stop getting annoyed. The quote is basically talking about if it's a cruel jest to basically tell a man to pick himself up by the bootstraps when he has no bootstraps. And I think about that in open source, where you're actually telling people, hey, just find some contributions, contribute, good luck. And I think there's a lot of tools out there that basically give us the tools to pull ourselves up from the bootstrap. But I find that path in the open source is a bit broken. And that's what I'm going to get to in a bit. And I talk about this term that I've been talking about a lot to a lot of my friends, a lot of my colleagues, which is called unintentional gatekeeping, where it's not intentional that I don't want you to contribute to my project, or I want to make it harder for you to contribute to my project. It's just I didn't really think about it. We also have this term unconscious bias. I don't think you're unconsciously biased by not actually allowing people in the project, but I think there's a gate of what the bare minimum expectation is to contribute to projects. And we sort of have to sort of open up those gates and start to think about as maintainers of projects, but as well as contributors. So I'm just going to call out and just say there are definitely missing parts of getting involved in open source, and like whether that is GitHub's fault or whether that is the maintainer's fault, like it doesn't matter. Like we don't have to point around and make blame. I know GitHub is the biggest like elephant in the room around when it comes to open source. Like it is the place to find and discover open source projects. But me personally, every time I find a project, I don't know where to start. There's a lot of tools, and I mentioned this. These are great tools, so please write them down. Good open source guide. Members of GitHub and former members of my team built this. And it's an amazing platform, amazing tool for you to actually get involved in open source and have all the information out there. Like we're democratizing the accessibility of open source. And I'm super proud of that. Next one being good first issues. So you might not know where to start. There's actually an entire platform. There's CLIs, there's APIs, and there's also labels in GitHub where you can actually find good first issues to contribute to. Like these are like legit places where you could actually have that nice onboarding experience. And there's also codetriage.com. I highly recommend signing up for this if you have a project you have in mind. Sign up. You get emails every morning about what issues that you could probably contribute to. And I think this is this is a wealth of tools, a wealth of information for you to do. But going back to the Martin Luther King quote and going into this quote, which Gucci Mane, he's the godfather of trap music. Also he's from Atlanta, Georgia. If you don't got sauce, then you lost. This is actually a quote that came out of one of his YouTube interviews back quite some time ago, actually. And I love this quote because it kind of sounds like sauce, but also it's true. If you don't know what you're looking at, you don't even know what to do. So we need like the next step of, okay, I have this stuff, I have all the issues, I've got the contributing MD, now what? So I made an open source project to manage my open source contributions, and I called it Open Sauce, basically based on the Gucci Mane quote. This is what it looked like. I made it roughly like about 4 years ago, and I made it for myself because I wanted to wake up every morning and look at projects I was interested in contributing to, and then I would be able to triage and manage like the information flow of actually contributing back upstream to projects. And essentially what it was a way, what it still is today, is a way for me to save and take notes on projects for later. The way I built it is that GitHub actually exposed this thing called the GraphQL API. At the time, it was super cutting edge and new, and I think it actually still is. But I wanted a way to actually learn how to use GraphQL. So this is the reason why I made the project. But I wanted a way to contribute back to open source. So I've got this. This is basically the architecture. I've got no backend. It's basically GitHub's my backend for my entire project. And it's built on a React front end. If that is enticing, or if not, I'm just mentioning it just for context. And this is what it looks like today. So the entire backend of my app is actually nothing but a GitHub repo. And I did this intentionally because I don't want to create another layer abstraction for people to try to get an open source and try to get them to learn how to do open source through another lens. Like the entire front end is basically just reading through my repo, which has my open source goals. And these are all issues that are basically one-to-one match on the front end. So I highly recommend that you try it out. It is open source, so it is quite, some things are broken. There are like roughly 41 issues. I'm happy to take contributions. And the other way I'm sort of magically making this work and stay in sync with the data and my goals is I'm leveraging GitHub Actions. I don't have time to go into details of GitHub Actions and how that works, but I just want you to know that it exists. So this is what it looks like open source. That's literally the URL. But I did want to roll through the next two parts. So we know how to get the information. Now we need to know how to onboard in the open source. So when I start a new job at any company, the first thing I do is I get onboarded. I get to talk to a developer. Someone gives me a laptop. I get to install all the stuff. With open source, you don't quite have that onboarding. So I don't know who to talk to. I don't know what to work on. I don't know how to work on this. All that stuff is like not really clear. And I have a personal story of me actually approaching that myself, where graphical. So I mentioned GraphQL. I wanted to contribute to graphical. So the first thing I did was I went to /contribute. If you don't know about this, you get a bunch of good first issues as well as some documentation changes. I went there, grabbed an issue, read the contributing MD, which is pretty common. You'll learn this in a lot of different other spaces. And I grabbed an issue. And then once I grabbed the issue, I found out really quickly the issue was way too old. So I grabbed an issue from like 2017, and it turned out graphical was going through a whole new update. So I ended up getting feedback really quickly saying, hey, this is great, but maybe jump into Discord and then we can chat through how to contribute. So right off the bat, though I did the wrong step and I went to an old issue, I was able to get mentorship directly from Ricky, who's here and popped in there. So my question is, why solve this problem? We have most of it solved. Like we can just like one more step. And I would say sustainable open source. And sustainability comes through, now this is only one solution, which is GitHub sponsors. GitHub sponsors is a feature on GitHub, so you can get paid for open source. I came through 2 weeks of super, like I was borderline depressed, probably, maybe I can't admit it, but I was pretty depressed on what was happening in the world. And I didn't know what to do about it. And I didn't feel like I could just go down, march down the streets and tell people to, defund the police or whatever. But I knew how to exercise my privilege in my own domain. So I had a tweet where I asked for Black developers, maintainers to reach out to me and say, hey, if you're a maintainer of a project, let me know, I'll sponsor you. And that's exactly what happened. So I've literally, this is not really blowing smoke up my own, myself, but I was able to actually change their lives in the direction. Like I'm paid very well at GitHub and I'm very proud about that. But I also want to bring other people up. Like no one's going to take care of your own community. You have to take care of your community as well. We can't wait for everybody else to do it. So I looked into Twitter. I found these people. Monica is one of them. Monica went from 3 sponsors to now 49 sponsors. I don't know how much she's making a month, but I know that's a big difference. Monica is involved in the React Ladies space. She's doing a lot of great work, and I think she needs to be rewarded for that. I don't know how well known she was. I only found her like maybe a month prior to this, but I'm super proud that I was able to take the idea of mentorship, but take it to the next level. Like I'm invested in the future and growth of Monica. And I encourage and employ everybody who's on here. I know we have allies in the chat. Please reach out to somebody who's not like yourself and sponsor them, invest in them. I'm super appreciative of that. And I would also want to say this is not about money. It's about access. So if sponsor money is not the thing that you can do, information is the thing you can give. What Ricky did to me and brought me in the fold into his community and told me exactly how to contribute, that's what we need. Like we can't just get a bunch of list of GitHub issues or a bunch of other tools just to give us a bunch of information. Like someone needs to actually guide us and shepherd us into contributing. So I say all this because the lack of information is what really got the systematic stuff, like the systematic racism that we have specifically in the US. It really comes down to lack of information. Like we can go down to, new Jim Crow. We can talk about the 13th. We can talk about all those different things that got us here today. And I think what we really need to start thinking about is how do we start fixing this? Like how do we bring new people into the fold and help contributors, like help the community of contributors look not like the community of contributors that we have today. Like there are a lot of awesome programs out there. Like Python is an awesome community. It has lots of different organizations, PyLadies and stuff like that. Like that's awesome organizations, but we need to continue to bring more and more people in the fold, bring more and more engineers, more and more junior developers like on board as well. So I talk about sustainable open source contributions. Like this is an opportunity for us to really just elevate our community. Like there's a lot of opportunity out there. And I have this project. This is literally what the project looks like today. OpenSauce.pizza is the TLD. I'm pretty proud of that actually. But like it's more than just like a platform on top of GitHub. Like I personally am proud that I also, thanks to Ricky and how he onboarded me, I've created a Discord so that I can bring more people in the fold. So it's not about open source and open sourced and people building up my platform. It's me about just building up just the community of open source. And I think if it hasn't been relevant today, like or if it hasn't been really seen of what I'm trying to get at is it's not about the information. It's about accessing the information. So if you can bring people into your Discord, if people can actually get out onto Twitter and onto the quote unquote streets and actually bring people into the fold, I think that's going to make the difference. And like when we look at, hey, who in open source are, how do we get more Black engineers? How do we get more Latin engineers? How do we get more X, Y, Z engineers? It starts here. It starts on 5 years ago. I learned how to do open source because someone took the time to invest into me. And then, so the question is like, who are you investing and who are you sponsoring today? I also have a Discord. It's not just about open source. It's actually about open source contributions. So what I'm super proud of is that I can do a call out from my Twitter account and say, hey, what open source projects need contributions today. And this is the actual response that I got yesterday. So Interact, Safia is actually maintaining that. Definitely check it out. JavaScript, Python, TypeScript, CockroachDB. It's a Go library. It's actually a database, super lightweight database. Definitely check that out. Code for PDX are doing a lot of social justice stuff. So I think it's a meetup as well. I'm not sure. Meetups today are kind of weird in the whole remote landscape. So not sure if it's just a community or a meetup. I have not been, but they reached out and said, hey, check it out. Webhint, also some other linting and stuff like that. So I have a GitHub repo, which is open source. I am actually committing myself to start shipping discussions each week for anybody who's looking to get contributions. So I'll probably make it an API or something in the future, but I was super impressed on how people responded to my call out, that I hope that other people will do that the same thing. Like, we should constantly be sharing and tweeting good first issues. There's lots of integrations that we should be doing, but we should also take the time to also bring other people into the fold as well. So if it hasn't been said enough, like, we need to actually end the gatekeeping and start sponsoring new developers into open source. I'm bdougio. I'm bdougie on GitHub as well, so feel free to reach out, ask questions. I am a GitHub employee as well. I did mention that earlier. So you do have questions about GitHub or just like leveraging GitHub in unique ways, I'm happy to hear it. And that was a GIF I was supposed to hit. And I just want to end and say, don't get lost, stay saucy, and happy Juneteenth, everybody.